There were still a few minutes left before the class started. Yet the auditorium was already filled to capacity with students from all over the galaxy. Such a sight was not that uncommon, but, unlike usual, the sheer number of participants was physically higher than that of the enrolled cadets, which forced many to stand in the aisles or in the back of the room, as some even had to take a spot by the doors. To address the situation, the staff attempted to check each student's ID. However, it quickly became clear that, due to the large number of cards that needed to be authenticated, they would not be able to finish in a timely manner, and continuing the procedure during the lecture would only lead to confusion. Resigned, they limited themselves to reorganizing the unruly masses to grant everyone present the best view and experience possible, given the circumstances. Just as the bell rang, politely navigating through the crowd gathered by the entrance, a small figure wearing a red tie and large glasses swiftly approached the stage. After exchanging a handshake and formal pleasantries with the head professor, he quietly sat in the empty chair. "Silence, please," ordered the echoing voice of a member of the staff through the speakers. Following a few seconds of murmurs and low voices, as most attendees wiggled themselves into a proper listening position, the auditorium fell silent. "Good morning," said the head professor, now standing behind the podium in charge of the microphone. Looking around, he seemed unconcerned about the number of students present, although he wished his classes were always this full. "As I'm sure you all know that today, for our course on war studies, we have secured the priceless collaboration of Professor Ayom, an esteemed expert in the field, and none other than the head theorist for the Galactic Institute for the Study of Warfare. Please greet him with due respect." As the minute alien walked up to the downstage, he was met with applause that lasted just long enough to praise him, but not so much that it hindered his actions. He then lowered the microphone to meet his stature and thanked the auditors for their presence before clearing his throat. "I had just returned last week from my tour with the Brian Armed Forces as a wartime correspondent when your teacher, an old friend of mine, asked me to come here and speak about my experiences and thoughts about the latest coalition-union conflict," Professor Ayom said while consulting an old-fashioned paper notebook. "Normally, I would have politely refused as my academic interest is preceded by my work obligations. However, after some personal reflections, I have come to the conclusion that an open-ended discourse with young and bright minds like yours would be the best source of objective criticism and elaborated arguments that would enhance my knowledge and understanding of the matter for my upcoming article. Therefore, I encourage you to not be silent and share your opinions in the second half of the lecture." The old Brian waited for the room to fall silent again after a brief moment of whispers and chatter. "I'm sure you have all read the news," calmly continued the professor. "A new race joins a long-lasting conflict between two seemingly on-pair belligerents and turns the table in a flash," he continued. "We all know who I am referring to, right? You, over there, the one frantically writing every single word I say. Can you tell me who we are talking about?" The humans." "Right. The humans. And what do you know about them?" "Don't worry if you are unprepared. This is not an exam. Answer whatever you can." They are from Earth." "Earth, right?" "Yeah, and they are widely known for being Deathworlders." "Good," said Professor Ayom, sensing the cold sweat and silent panic close to overwhelming that one student. "Do you know where Earth is, galactically speaking?" continued, addressing a particularly massive alien seated in the first rows that shielded the view for most listeners behind him. "Terra can be found around the middle of the Orion Arm." "And why is that important?" "So, Earth's parent star is at the epicenter of the Orion evolutional dead zone." "I see someone has come prepared today." "Good, very good," smirked the Brian as he nodded back at the head professor. "I see that half of you have a surprised look on your face, while the other half is unfortunately from a species whose facial expression I cannot interpret. To cut to the chase, the OEDZ is a vast region of space at the center of the Orion Arm, where, for numerous known and unknown reasons, sapient and intelligent life has never been observed developing autochthony. It might not come as a surprise that this particular sector is also home to the overwhelming majority of deathworlds found in the galaxy. All the while, behind Professor Ayom on the wall-sized screen, many graphs and illustrations accompanied and enriched the detailed explanation. Then again, because of the inherent dangers of traversing the OADZ, the lack of mapped hyperspace lanes, and the perceived scarcity of noteworthy findings in said area, no one had yet ventured deep enough to come into contact with what we officially call the astral domain of mankind. Do any of you know how first contact was established? Many hands, or appendices, eagerly waved in the dim room, challenging each other to reach higher or be more noticeable. Eventually, one was called out. It was a damaged Keltian freighter. To escape from space marauders in a nearby sector, the captain ordered a blind jump. They ended up in an unknown system tens of light years deep inside the Orion Zone and found a strange object that caused them problems near the star. But I don't remember what it was exactly. It was an FTL inhibitor, an advanced system that listens and manipulates gravitational waves to a certain extent, akin to an FTL disruptor. While the latter is limited in capabilities, slowing down and confusing the navigational computer of any spacecraft going at relativistic speeds within its range of effectiveness, the former physically pulls out any unregistered vessel from hyperspace and scrambles the navigational computers. Sensors, resulting in extremely dilated coordination inputs and trajectory solutions. But Professor, as I understand, the Keltians had no problem destroying this FTL inhibitor. Oh, absolutely. But you must know that the true purpose of the inhibitor is not to stop the perpetrator, but to warn the user. As a matter of fact, it took the freighter a good while to find the source of the inhibition signal, as all their sensors were being jammed. Enough time for a human warship to survey the system and find them. Then we all know what happened. As the Keltians established first contact, the stubborn marauders, who managed to track down their position and were reckless enough to jump into the OEDs, abruptly attacked. The following battle has been described by one of the sailors aboard the merchantman as a quick, cold, and precise affair with no room for negotiations or second thoughts after the pirates fired the first shot in anger. On the screen behind the podium, various recordings and censored scenes of the battle were shown as the Brian allowed himself a breathing moment while everyone's attention was directed at the bright show of light. To begin understanding Terra's strategic posture, you must comprehend their history and culture first, as you would with any other species. Does anyone here know anything? How about it? The students' following answers were varied and oftentimes vague or misinformed. Despite this, Professor Ayom was not bothered by the lack of a clear picture, as rumors and fiction often travel faster than factual truths. First off, humanity is not a single block, a single entity. It's a federation of numerous quasi-independent powers, oftentimes at odds with each other, all answering directly to Terra, the symbolic seat of government, where the Senate and the rest of the official governing institutions reside. This creates a strange geopolitical phenomenon where each sector has its own different sets of laws born from different needs, requirements, and cultures which are all superseded by the federal law. What they proudly address as the universal human rights. If they are so divided, wouldn't they be easy to conquer? Asked a student dressed in military attire from Nimbia, a well-known warmongering matriarchal society. No, not at all. To begin with, each invasion force or unregistered craft for what matters will be caught by the great net, the enormously vast array of FTL inhibitors that shrouds the entirety of human space like a balloon. The only way to avoid getting caught in the netting would be to go through one of the few newly opened checkpoints, but that would be extremely costly in terms of losses as they are heavily guarded. An opponent might study and observe the garrisoning units to attack with an appropriate force then. Yes. Acting in this way would be the safest course of action, and the most predictable. The truth is that we do not know yet what kind of reaction forces lay silent waiting to be called upon. Get a glimpse of the metaphorical sword of Terra as it was briefly unsheathed at the battle for the Taraki home system. Professor Ayom replied nonchalantly as he backed down from the stage to reach a bottle of water. As he regained his position, he was not surprised to see everyone in the auditorium restlessly waiting to hear his first-hand accounts. He smiled before continuing. You are from Nimbia, right? Yes, sir. Say, based on what you know, tell me the minimum forces the Nimbians would have deployed to conquer Turrak's moon in a solely ground-based operation. It's not a trick question, answer honestly. Given the size, population, and fortifications, sir, I think our queen would have led an invasion of no less than 10 sisterhoods, or around 30.0 warriors with accompanying support assets to conquer the moon within an acceptable margin of losses. Good, and you? Over there? Where are you from, and how would you reply to the same question? I'm from Exoten, Professor. My people would have deployed 40 warbands to ensure a complete and swift end of their defensive efforts. Professor Eom smiled again as he turned to face the footage he personally recorded of the battle for Turrak, shown on the screen. Well, the Terrans sent one division of reservists, which admittedly had no business being there, and a single regiment from the now famed human Marines. Altogether, the initial invasion force was no more than 15.0 soldiers, the vast majority of which had never seen actual combat. Later on, additional regiments were space-lifted from the parent planet, already pacified, but by the time they got there, it was already over. Hearing the news, the room exploded in an uproar which was hardly quelled by the insistent intervention of the overworked staff. I've specifically chosen Turnik as an example because it displays perfectly the point I want to make. Can you guess what this is? Yet again, many students eager to prove themselves put forth some of the most outlandish theories and contrived ideas, mostly trying to impress the honored guest. Well, all of these are intuitive and well-thought-out arguments, but what you couldn't have known is that Turnik was in no way a routine human deployment. Far from it. But I managed to get a hold on the standard procedures for interstellar assaults of the human astro-military right here, said the professor, proudly waving a white paper folder in the air. Do not worry. It is not classified documentation, is easily findable on the human internet. I got it in the online forums of a certain military vehicle simulator game, continued Eom, with the sinister smirk of someone certain to have actually won an argument. With that said, where was that Nimbian student? Yes, there you are. Tell me again, as a thought experiment, what do you think would be necessary to conquer, say, this star system? Due to logistical ease and strategic flexibility, I think a sister order would be ideal. Around 100 sisterhoods would swiftly conquer the 2 inhabited planets and the various space stations of the system. Good. And what does the Exoten think of this? I would agree with the Honorable Nimbian Sister. A standard stellar army would be more than sufficient. What I would expect to hear from a proud and noble Exoton. Hearing this praise by the attractive and muscular female, the alien could not hide the pigmentary changes of his scales to warmer colors, as his chest puffed with gusto. The Brian went on listening to a couple more students before swiftly flicking through the pages of the file he held. He then continued. Well, the humans think differently. If Earth ordered this planet and the rest of the neighborhood to be captured, they would bring nothing less than a star core to achieve such a task, said Professor Eom. Then he paused, inviting the listeners to discern the meaning for themselves. I'm sorry, Professor, but we know barely anything about these humans. Could you explain to us what kind of unit we are talking about? Oh, right. Forgive me, I almost forgot you don't have access to the resources I do. Well, to put it simply, a star core is, for now, the smallest independent strategic unit utilized by the Terran military to conduct system-wide operations. It is comprised of Navy and Army units under a joint command consisting of, depending on the specific corps in question, 3 to 5 Army groups with accompanying air assets, and between 500 and 750 warships, excluding auxiliary vessels, support crafts, and dedicated troop transports. Sensing the still lingering confusion, Professor Ayulm understood that only hard digits could paint a proper picture. To put it into numbers, we are talking 1,500, 0 to 2,500, 0 soldiers and 500.0 to 750.0 sailors. Everyone kept silent in the room. An invasion force with these sorts of numbers was comparable only to armies from Gestalt consciousness or hive minds, which offset the arguably poor performance on the field with sheer numbers. Immediately afterward, most of the attendees, as they had been trained to do, imagined a scenario in which they had to confront this monstrous enemy. The results were discouraging, as many of them quickly recalled how a relatively small and untrained force had managed to subdue an entire moon. "This is absurd! Such a massive formation to conquer a single system?" screamed out loud the Nimbian youth. Yes, as I mentioned earlier, this would be the bare minimum required. Considering the size and characteristics of this system, Terra's High Command would likely deploy 2 or even 3 Star Corps, anticipating at least a 6-month operation. It's important to note that these predictions were made with a human, peer-on-peer adversary in mind. With such an overwhelming force, it would take only 6 days. How can they deploy this many soldiers without severely undermanning other sectors? This strategic posture is purely offensive. The professor seemed to smile upon hearing this and many other questions from the audience, as if he had anticipated their thought. And this is where it becomes intriguing, or rather, alarming. Humanity has always been burdened by the baseless fear that their first contact would result in a struggle for survival on an extinction level. Their popular culture often depicts aliens as embodiments of destruction, an unknowable and unstoppable force with which one cannot argue or compromise. In a way, it's simply a reflection of themselves. So, they've always been prepared to fight with us? Even before first contact? Yes. Ever since they ventured into the stars, even during civil wars, internal conflicts, and periods of intense tension, there has always been a universal sentiment that, in the face of an external threat, all of humanity would once again unite behind the banner of the blue marble. Even now, as humanity enjoys an economic boom within its interstellar borders, they remain prepared to welcome unwanted guests, so to speak. Professor Eom took advantage of the momentary chatter to take a sip of water before continuing. He then cleared his throat. You see, humans have always assumed that aliens would be superior to them in terms of technology, numbers, or physical abilities. This fear, coupled with their complicated history of internal conflict, has driven a relentless quest for technological advancements. As a result, there has been a cascading improvement in various aspects of life, including population growth and physical health. How does that translate to fighting capabilities? Can you tell us the full extent of their military? During peacetime, as is now, they have 26 standing Star Corps. Flexible and fast, we theorize they could be deployed as far as the edge of the Orion Arm within a 72-hour notice. To complement this quick reaction force, each settlement with a population of over 1 billion is required to maintain at least 2 system core, which are similar to Star Corps in terms of structure. Typically, these so-called lesser core are confined to their respective star or planet and are only deployed elsewhere in case of necessity. However, there are numerous examples of colonies that do not meet the population quota, yet still have more than 5 system core. Just how many humans are out there? The exotown exclaimed out loud after he concluded his mental war simulation with dreadful results. Within the OEDZ, there are approximately 1,000 permanent settlements housing over 1 billion humans, with hundreds of these having populations in the dozens of billions or more. Counting all the planets, moons, and other celestial bodies with fewer than 1 billion registered residents would be extremely time-consuming and might simply overwhelm you with information. What can we even do at this point? Resigned, one of the students murmured to herself. We can only hope the ape from Earth does not look up at the night sky and decide to make it hers out of a whim or arbitrary birthrights. The galaxy is simply not ready for the terrifying scale of human warfare. Softly said Professor Iom. That's enough with gloomy thought. The humans I have met were quite cheerful and overly accommodating by galactic standards. Does anyone here have any questions? We still have a lot of time. Somewhat elated by the shift in mood, many students happily formed a line at the base of the stage. The old Brian took a moment of respite and sat next to the head professor, who offered him a glass of wine. Excellent work, my friend. Let's have a toast. What might the toast be about? The head professor thought for a moment before raising his drink up in the air. To our wellness. in hopes we are never witnesses of the ultimate art by the ultimate artisan.